thank you for confirming that you can actually hear me properly. I'm just going to go share my screen now, so sure you guys can see, so that we can start from where we stopped. So in today's class, what we are going to be doing is we are going to be talking about the learning part, which is the management and governance, and this is like the last learning part in this particular course, AZ 100, AZ 900. Now, but the only thing I'm going to be doing today, because after today, like I said, we are going to move ahead to AZ 104, which is where the main thing starts. This is where we start talking about the Azure administrator, those services within there. But why I took my time, and like I said, this particular course shouldn't have been more than 2 weeks. But why I took my time was, just to make sure that we have a very good foundation. Now, starting from the 104, I'm not going to be sharing this PowerPoint slide. I would have a PowerPoint slide I will be sharing also, but the major focus will be on the practical section. So, but never, you're not going to miss anything out. I'm going to make sure that whatever I need to discuss theoretically also is going to be included in one random PowerPoint slide, but not the official PowerPoint slide for the exam. I'm not going to be using these two because it's going to take all the time if we are to go by, slide after slide. So what I'm going to do is it will be more of lab focus, but within the lab, any terms that comes in there, we are going to be explaining, we are going to be discussing, about those theories, those terms, and the likes. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. But you guys notice that we have not even done anything related to labs in this particular 109 900, because the main focus has been on the theoretical aspect, just for you to have a good understanding of what we are trying to dive into. So what I'm going to be doing next week, we have like two full hours next week where we are going to be talking about all the theoretical aspects, sorry, all the practical aspects, in this particular AZ 900. So we've got 6 labs, and we are going to be going through all those labs one after the other. So, like I said, I've got those labs, I've done them. They're actually uploaded to my YouTube channel. If you want to look it, if you want to check, or if you want to go through those labs before next week, that would be good, so that when I'm actually doing these, because I want this interactive class, do not be shy, because it might come next week and I will tell you one of you, to share his or her screen, and let's see, let's go ahead, and while you're trying to do it, while you're trying to complete it, I'll be explaining if need be, But please, so next week, don't join from from your phone. Try to join from your system. I'm gonna call on anyone, but that doesn't mean you should not join. Please join. you know All right. So if you have got any questions from last week, just let me know. Today, like I said, we are going to be focusing on management and governance. And what I'm trying to make sure is to complete this particular learning part today. We do not have so many things on this slide, so we are going to be completing it today so that we can have the whole of next week, the whole of next week for the labs. Then after then, we might decide to take a break. No, not a break. We don't need it. We just jump into the 104, and let's start the journey. Okay, so this is what we have for today, and like I said, this is the learning part three, management and governance. The learning part outline. These are what we're going to be looking for today. These are very, very important. So you are also needs to focus. You also need to understand this part. We're going to talk about the cost and pricing calculator. You guys know how the pricing model is for Azure now. For the cloud, we go by pay as you go, model. So we talk about the cost management and tags. What are tags? What are cost management? Then from there we'll go on to talk about governance and compliance. For every resource that we deploy, because we said, you can actually deploy in any region, as far as is within the public cloud. So you can actually deploy in there as far as you're not trying to deploy. You won't even have access to the sovereign cloud, which is the governance cloud, like the government cloud, like the one in the US, like the one in China, you know. So we'll keep deploying. But for all these resources that we deploy, I can decide to establish my organization in Nigeria and start deploying in Hong Kong. But does that make those resources compliant? For every resource we deploy, also we need to make sure that they are also compliant. So we want to be sure that maybe location compliant, whatever compliant, ISO, anyone that we're putting in place. So we have what we call the governance and compliance within the within the Azure environment. We're going to be talking about what blueprint is, what policies is, or policies are, resource log, how do we use it, what is the resource log. Then we look at what we call, or the portal we refer to as service trust. What does it bring to us? Is this just for recommendations? Are we going to be, yeah, TJ, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry for interrupting. I can't see your screen on Teams.
Um,
You know,
I'm sharing the screen.
I'm just
Um,
you.
if if you could look at,
If you could look
if you
at
could check your,
the check your,
or you just type.
or you just
I can't hear you properly. If if anyone can confirm, if you are hearing TJ properly, I can't. Maybe this is just for me, but I would like, anyone on this call to confirm if, um okay, so the audio is not clear. So if it's not clear, so if you could drop, um maybe yeah. Oh my word, that's true. Thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you so much. I never I never knew I was not sharing the screen. So sorry. Okay. That's fine. I never knew I was not sharing. Okay. Okay, that's for people on. I'm so sure people on YouTube and LinkedIn could actually see the screen. So yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much. Just give me a minute. Let me just quickly confirm if there is voice, because people kept complaining. I don't know what's going on about voice on YouTube and LinkedIn. I hope we finally have it today. But this is what I've been talking about since, for people that joined on link on Teams. So I just noticed we just started sharing the screen now. So this is the learning part, and these are what we're going to be discussing. These are what we're going to be talking about now. A minute, please. I'm just trying to see if we've got audio. Um, okay. Okay, that's fine. We've got the audio on there, and that looks great. Okay, so let's start talking about what we have for today. Like I said, we've got this particular learning part, the outline. This is what we're going to be discussing. I'm going to be going at a pace which is more faster than what we are used to, but for sure you're not going to be missing anything out. So we're just going to talk about all these cost management, the governance. Uh, that's going to be echoing. Just give me a minute. Let me just. Okay, so I think I. Okay, I think we are good now. We are not good. Just give me a minute. This it comes coming. It keeps coming back. What's going on? Okay, so I stopped at the governance and compliance, where we're going to talk about blueprint, policies, resources. All these tools that we're going to talk about under this particular um outline or under that particular module is going to be related to compliance. Then from there, we'll move on to what we call the resource deployment tools. What are some of the tools that we can actually leverage on to deploy resources within our environment? So we are going to talk about all these. It is not just via the GUI, which is via the portal, that we can only leverage on. We can also leverage on other tools, to make sure those resources are being deployed within our environment. So we are going to talk about all these resource deployment tools that we have, leveraging on the portal, the PowerShell, CLI, and all that. So for people that have been asking if it is compulsory for us to learn, a little bit of scripting, yes, it is not important if you do not need it, but it's so important and it will help your life out, if you could actually learn, you know, um, any of those scripting languages, or even, you know, programming languages. It will help you out. So from there, we'll move on to Azure Arc, Azure Resource Manager. But all these are just technical jargons, technical terms that we're just going to be discussing. So let's just dive into this particular learning part 3 and check what we have for today. So we are going to start with cost management for sure, which is the first thing. The main thing under this particular objective is for us to describe what are some of the things that affect the cost. So when you're deploying a resource within the Azure environment, when you're deploying a resource within AWS or any other cloud providers, what are some of the things that would add to the cost? Now, one of the things I would be talking about would be, the region, the type of resource you are deploying. When you deploy a virtual machine, is different from when you deploy a storage account. Because when you deploy a storage account, you still have a storage account, within the virtual machine, which is not like really really storage account, but one of the kind like the Azure disk, where you can actually store your data and file. That means you will know for sure that there are combination of resources that makes up that virtual machine. Before you can actually deploy a virtual machine, you need a VNet. You need, to deploy maybe your subnet. You need to deploy if you need a public IP on that particular virtual machine, you need to deploy that. You need to add, within that particular VNet, you need to have a subnet. All these things you need to have like storage accounts, like disks deployed alongside that particular machine. So you have tons of resources that makes up that particular virtual machine. As against when you're deploying a storage account, that means for sure you're going to be paying more if you deploy a virtual machine as against when you deploy a storage account. So we're going to that actually affect the cost. So we are going to discuss about that. We are going to talk about the fact that regions, any of the regions, we have so many regions where you can actually deploy your resources. The fact that you can deploy in South Africa region and you deploy the same resource within the UK West region doesn't mean that they are going to cost you the same. So region-based price, there are resources that you deploy that are actually lesser or cheaper in some regions, as compared to some other regions. We're going to talk about that. From there, we'll move on to pricing calculator and cost of ownership. Now, we're going to see, because when we're discussing about the benefit of Azure or benefit of cloud, we talked about the predictability. Under predictability, I said we have cost predictability and also we have performance predictability. Now, under performance predictability is where we talk about, okay, the fact that we want to make sure that our resources are up to what we actually deploying in there. Or let's say we have an application running an app service. We know based on what we've deployed like a 1 GB app service, what is going to be there. We know how it's going to run, how fast it's going to run. That you can actually determine, the performance predictability. Now, for the cost predictability, when you're trying to deploy any resource within the Azure environment, it tells you how much it's going to consume at the end of the month, but it doesn't mean that it's going to consume that particular amount. Let's say I deploy a virtual machine now, and I just says this is going to cost you $300 per month. But if I'm not running that virtual machine 24/7, if I'm turning that virtual machine off when I don't need it, if I'm deallocating that virtual machine when I don't need it, all those IP addresses, attached to the virtual machine are actually being deallocated and the like, I will not be paying up to that, So, and those are things that actually, those are actually things that actually, affect the pricing of that particular resource. So it comes under price calculator. We can calculate how much we are going to be spending at the end of the month if that particular resource is running, maybe 24/7, how long we're going to be running it. So we talk about cost of ownership. We'll compare if you're running, let's say you deploy an application on your own premises environment and you're going to be running that application, you need a server, you need some other things. You need to set up like a small data center where you'll be running that particular application or those applications you want to be running. You know, you need to make sure that, there is electricity every time. You need to make sure that, there are cooling systems. You need to make sure that, there are networks and the like. At the end of the day, or let's even say at the end of the year, you want to compare how much you would have spent when it comes to the operational cost, when it comes to the capital you invested initially, compared to if you move that same application, or same workload to the cloud. So we are going to compare, and that's where we're going to get, the cost of ownership and the like. Then we'll describe what the Azure cost management tool is and what we use a tag for. So let's move on. So let's start with what are some of the factors that affect cost of resources within the Azure environment. Now we'll start talking about the resource type, which I talked about the other time. Depending on the kind of resource that you deploy, you are going to be built based on that. So if you deploy a virtual machine, it's going to be different from when you deploy, like like a storage account, like I said the other time. So the other one is the consumption rate. Azure uses the pay as you go consumption model, and that's going to be like a driving, so if you deploy a virtual machine, now you know how much you're going to be paying at the end of the month, but you decided to turn off that virtual machine when there is no need for it. So you are not going to be charged, or you even decided to delete that virtual machine, before the end of the month. Let's say you use it for only 2 days. You are not going to be charged for 30 days. You are only going to be charged for those 2 days that you use that virtual machine. Maintenance, monitoring, maintenance, and the likes. Now, yeah, it still talks about the fact that, let's say you shutting down that particular, underused virtual machine, when they are not necessary, you are deallocating it, it also affects the price also. And those are what have actually been, you can see it's kind of interwoven. Um, what are some other things that do affect your cost? We talk about the regions the other time. Now, depending on the region where you have actually deployed that virtual machine, you are going to be. Give me a minute. Just give me a minute. Give me a minute. Going to deactivate this.
What? Because
Give me a minute, please. Hello? Okay. You guys can hear me now. I'm going to take it back. Right. I'm so sorry. Needed to attend to something. Now, so we talked about the region. Region also, the region that you actually deploy your resource can also affect the costing. It can also affect the cost of that particular resource, that you've deployed. Um, another thing that would also affect that particular resource is the network traffic. So what happens is when you're actually uploading or you're actually deploying or you're actually transferring, your resources to Azure environment, inbound data is actually free. But when you want to export or you want to get back your data, you are going to be paying. A very typical example is when you are uploading your data on, let's say, the Azure blob, you are updating your data on storage account, inbound data is free, while you are uploading. But when it comes to you transferring out, when it comes to you getting out a particular resource, you're going to be paying for the outbound data. The last thing that is going to affect is the type of subscription that you've leveraged on. There are different types of subscription when it comes to Azure. We have enterprise subscription, we have pay as you go, we have some other free, student subscription and the like. So depending on the type of subscription that you have actually leveraged on, that's also going to affect, the cost. Moving away from that, this talks about the Azure Marketplace. The Azure Marketplace, just like the normal marketplace that we have, this is where you can actually get, different services and applications. Now, different as when you get to the Azure Marketplace, it doesn't just have those services. There are still those services, but most of those applications you are going to see there are third-party applications. Like you are going to be able to deploy applications that are not even integrated by Microsoft in the Azure environment, maybe by third party. So let's say you want to deploy something like SonarQube, you want to deploy WordPress. So if Azure doesn't have that particular WordPress, you can go to the marketplace and say, okay, this is the kind of WordPress I want to deploy. This is the kind of SonarQube I want to deploy. There are third-party applications you can actually leverage on, that are not managed by Microsoft. So for you to be able to use those kind of applications, you can actually go to the third party, to the marketplace, and you are going to see, those particular applications. There are some that you need to pay for. There are some that are free to use. So it all depends on the kind of application you want to leverage on. But all those applications are still centered around Microsoft services. And let's say someone deployed a virtual machine, but that virtual machine specifically is for hosting WordPress. So Azure might not really have something like that, though it does have now. But before now, we used to go to to third party applications to have that deployed, like Bitmoney and the like. Um, the pricing calculator, I just talked about the pricing calculator the other time, but this is how it looks like, and this is one of the labs you are going to be looking at. I think it's the lab 5 or 6, which we're going to be talking about next week. Now here, it's just give you an estimate. We talked about the fact that one of the benefits of the cloud is you get like an estimate of the pricing at the end of the, if you continue to use that particular resource, maybe for a whole month, for an hour, for a whole day, and the like. So you get an estimate, but before you can actually get an estimate, there are things you are going to be putting in there, and that pricing calculator is going to make that estimation based on those information you supply. The information you supply depends on the kind of configuration. So you can see what we have the region, which when we're talking about what are some of the factors that affect the pricing, the cost of a particular resource, we mentioned region. So region is so important. We mentioned, the tier. So when we talk about the tier, we are talking about what's the kind, maybe the size or something. It might be premium tier, it might be standard, it might be basic, depending on the kind of resource you're deploying. So the tiers are actually different. When you're talking about, let's say, public IP, you might talk about basic, you might talk about maybe free, you might talk about standard and the likes. So depending on the tier you're deploying, so if you're deploying a resource which is tagged premium, it's going to come with some characteristics, some configurations that are premium. Let's say maybe the size will be larger and the likes. Maybe the um the throughput, some of those things that belongs to premium resource, as against when you deploy something which is standard or basic. you know a very good example would be the app service. When you deploy on premium app service plan, you have, like, you can deploy up to or more than 100 particular apps. But when you do this, or the same on the free, or you do it on, yeah, let's even talk about the free now. It might just give you maybe 1 GB, and it only runs for 6 hours in a day and the like. So it all depends on the tier that you're actually looking at. Then the billing option. What billing option are you looking at? Is it pay as you go? Is it something you need to do, like, per hour, all those things. So support options also determine how much you're going to be paying for that particular resource. When we talk about the support option, is it a developer support? Is it enterprise support? Is it something you will be able to raise a severity, the highest severity, a priority case, should, in case you have issue with any of those your resource. So that also determines if you're going to be paying more on the like. So there are offers also. The kind of, if there are offers on that particular resource, also determine. And the last one will be, if you are just using this for test, you want to use this for production, because Azure has got, like, environment where you can actually deploy or leverage on dev to test resources. So you have to, but you might not see all this we've listed, in all those resources when you're trying to make that particular estimation. So, just example, from what we can see on the virtual machine, you can see there are nothing like, maybe Azure Dev Text or something. So, but when you go to maybe app service deployment and the like, you are definitely going to see it on there. So this determines how much you're going to be paying, and it just give you, like, an estimate of how much it's going to cost you at the end of the month. So we'll come back to this. This is part of the exercise I just talked about. And let's move to cost of ownership now. Now, it's also a tool that works just like the pricing calculator, but the way it works is kind of different. I explained that this works, it compares how much you're actually spending, maybe for running a workload on your data center, and it just compare it with how much you are going to be spending, the cost of operation, um, if you're actually running that particular workload in the cloud. So it gives you that comparison. So it's a tool that you can actually use, before you say, oh, we want to migrate to Azure. So you can actually check how much you're running, maybe the workload on your data center, let's say for the span of 5 years, and say, if we are to move this to Azure, how much are we going to get? So that you don't just say, oh, let's move to the cloud, when you guys are not ready for it, in terms of costing and the like. So you can see the diagram on the right hand side that, compares how much, let's say for a whole year, you will be spending deploying a workload on your on-premise, and if you're running it in the cloud. Now, one thing to consider in this is, you can see the majority of the costing when it comes to the on-premises, it's actually centered around the data center, because you surely you have, like, a capex, capex cost, the capital expenditure, where you need to, maybe set up a building, or get a building, rent a building, however you want to, do it, get your servers, do some AC configuration, some networking, make sure that, you have maybe solar panel, you have generators, and you're not just going to be having a generator at the end of the day. You're going to be foiling it, the solar panel. If there is a damage to the battery, you need to change it and the like. So all those things are what you're going to be talking about. The servers itself, making sure they are cool, they are fine, someone in there, you're paying them, and the like. The rest goes to maybe the networking, the storage. If you see here, the major thing, there is nothing on the data center. The major thing is the storage, because definitely what you're doing is you're actually putting your workload somewhere. You're actually storing it somewhere, and we have 33% also center around networking, because everything you want to access is going to be over the network, so you're going to be spending a lot there. But you can see that if you are to compare these, let's say for 5 years, you are saying, oh, we are going to be spending 30,702, at the end of this 5 year span, compared to 595 if we are to migrate the same workload to Azure environment. Because now you have nothing to do with CapEx, you have nothing to do with setting up that particular data center. So it gives you benefit, it saves you a lot, and that's what you use the cost of ownership, to do. It gives you an estimate of how much you're going to save when you finally move or migrate your resources to the cloud, compared to when you're still running it on premises. You will see. So, like I said, if you have got the time before next week, where we're going to be looking at all these particular labs, you want to check, um, in there, some of those videos are made on those labs. So if we give you an idea of what we're just going to be talking about, we're just going to be running all those labs, when we get to class next week. Cost management, the Azure cost management. Now, there's a dashboard we call the Azure cost management dashboard, and you can see what this gives you is just like billing reports. It gives you an estimate, say, oh, this is how much you've currently used. You're going to see what is actually consuming your money, what resource group is that particular resource in, what resource, what the type of that resource that is consuming your money, so you know how to manage it. It's going to also give you an estimate. You can see it tells currently, let's say we're in the month of April, let's say, right? Okay, let's use May, and it says this is 10th of May. From what we can see, you spend 2,746. With the way you're using these resources, at the end of the month, you are going to be spending 4,500, and you only have the capability, for 4,000. So you can actually set up, like, maybe a limit, to say, no, I don't want to go more than this particular limit. So that's cost management dashboard gives you that liberty. It lets you see what's going on within your environment when it comes to costing. You can set up a limit, you can set up a budget. It gives you recommendation. It says, oh, this particular resource is overused. If you want to deallocate it, this particular resource, maybe you do not need this particular storage. Maybe it's more than the size you need. It just gives you general recommendation, and you can actually act, on that based on the recommendation you have been given. Tags, one particular or one very good thing you need to know. So this is part of metadata for Azure resources. And when we talk about metadata, you are just talking about maybe properties, some of the things you can actually add. A tag is very important, and what it does is it logically organize your resources into what we call the taxonomy, and this is the way it works. So don't let us start reading out what we have. Let's say you deploy a resource, and that resource belongs to a particular department. Let's say we have a marketing department. Now, you want to know how much the marketing department are spending at the end of the month. Because we've deployed resources for the marketing department in all the resource group, it's not as if we have a dedicated resource group for them. They need a resource in this particular region. They need a resource in this particular resource group. And we've just deployed, those resources for them. But what we've done is we've made sure that any resource we've deployed for them, we've tagged it with their department. At the end of the month, we can say, oh, this is how much, the marketing department are consuming. This is how much. I've seen people now, what they do is they rather just create a subscription for them. But let's say we are all using one particular subscription. Yes, people can argue, why not just create a resource group for them, and we know that all their resources are. What if, you know there is a need for them to consume some other resources in some other resource group? There's a need for them to consume some other resources in another region or something. So We just want to have something to actually tag that those particular resources to say this belongs to this particular person, this belongs to this particular person. One other thing we can actually use the tag for, just like I've actually mentioned or give example of, let's say, department, we can actually tag in and say who created this resource. When you work in a very big organization, where maybe you have more than 100 subscriptions, you might not it might not be easy for you to start looking for who actually created that particular resource, because the thing is, after 30 days you're not going to get the audit log, you're not going to get the log again to see who has created these, who work on these. When it comes to the activity logs, I'll get the 104. You are going to be talking about that. We have. Oh, okay. I think we are still going to talk about it in this particular outline today. Now, we call there are logs for us to be able to monitor, activities on each resource we've deployed. So maybe sign-in activities, who is accessing it, or um, if anyone modified that particular resource, those are, audit activities. So we want to audit that particular resource. After some certain number of days, they are going to disappear, just like the sign-in logs disappear after 7 days. If you've got, premium licenses, it stays to 14 days. Activity logs disappear after 30 days and the like. So, but for you to be able to make sure it doesn't disappear, we'll still talk about how you can actually move those activity logs, those audit logs, those sign-in logs to maybe the storage account where you can save them. But that's not even what we are talking about now. But I'm just saying, yes, we can have like a tag to say this is the person that have deployed that particular resource created by tag. And every time, even if it's after 2 years, we can go back to the person and say, oh, this is your name on there. You are the owner of this particular resource. Can you take charge? Another thing, we can use it for environment also. We want to tag our resources based on the type, the kind of environment we're using it for. If it's dev, if it's, QA, if it's production, whatever we name our environment, we just want to tag and say, once you see that particular resource, you say, no, we are not deleting this particular resource. This is a production resource. We don't know what is, on there, even if we cannot access it. Okay, well, we've seen a resource that is tagged there, okay, even if we delete it, it doesn't affect any customer because, it's not production environment and like. So you can tag those, based on, you can see it really helps when it comes to billing information. It really helps when it comes to billing information. Um, yep. Um, Moving away, give me a minute. Give me a minute, please. Okay, let's continue from there. All right. So we just talked about the tag. So if you've got any question, just let me know. Moving away, let's move to governance and compliance. Like I said, today is going to be a little bit fast, even when I'm still taking my time to, to discuss these particular stuff. Um, Governance and compliance. Now, here we are just going to be talking about what are some of the services that we can leverage on to make sure that our resources are compliant. We just talk about the fact that, okay, for the fact that you can deploy in any region doesn't mean because it's cheaper for you to deploy a virtual machine in UK West you now decided to go and deploy it, even when your organization is in Australia. So you do not want to keep your data outside your region. So it does make sense, if we have that. Again, we can have something like, okay, we do not want our virtual machine to have public IP addresses, and we cannot control that. We cannot control what people are deploying. But the only way we can control this is to make sure we've deployed, or we've enabled the Azure policy to take care of that. So we are going to be looking at that. Just give me a minute. I need to check something. All right, let's continue from there. So let's just quickly move on to the governance and compliance. Please confirm you can still hear my screen. You can still hear me, and you can still see my screen, because I've seen everybody's been quiet since. Um, just want to be sure I'm not talking to myself. Okay, thanks, Sam. Okay, let's just continue. We talked about the Azure policy. I just talked about the Azure policy, and what this does is giving you an example of what we can actually use it for. So, but based on the definition here, it says is used to enforce organization standards. But the main thing, the end goal, is to make sure that those resources that we are deploying are compliant. So really for compliant purposes, and that's why we have that particular resource, that particular service. That's why we're leveraging on it, on it. So it's just to make sure that those resources we're deploying are actually compliant. So the way it works, I think when we get to 104, we are going to really go deep into this. We have what we call the definition, where we describe, or where we configure what's going to be checked for, when it comes to these compliances. And we have the assignment, where we can actually assign, okay, what's the scope, or where do we want to make sure, yeah, this is assigned to. So is this going to be on the resource, so that on the resource group, so that all the resources within this resource group can be checked? Or is it just for, or is it for a particular subscription, all resources within that particular subscription will be checked? Or is it going to be assigned to a management group? So the scope are where we actually, what's the location, where are we assigning this to? We're going to look at that. We're going to talk about initiative definition, initiative assignment, which are combination of those assignments I just talked about, or combination of those definitions we talked about. So when we have the definition, this is where we describe, the condition that needs to be met, what will happen, and and the assignment, which is where, what location do we want to assign it to, what resources are we targeting, and that's it. Let's move ahead to what we call the resource logs. So for resource logs, it's different from the from policies, because this, when you deploy any application or any resource within your environment, what this is trying to prevent is, let's say, I'm just going to quickly give you an example. I know I can read this out from here, but I'm not going to do that. But so let's say we have an intern joining our organization, and we have this production environment. We giving the intern, maybe by mistake, permissions that it doesn't even need, and it goes in there and say, oh, okay, this is the perfect way for me to even learn about this Azure. Okay, let me even see what this delete button does. And it goes in there and say delete, and that Azure asks, oh, are you sure you want to delete? Where's yes, if you want to delete, and it goes in, bam, delete. you know what's going to happen is our production environment is gone. At least, even if we are going to um um find find a way to bring it back up, it's definitely going to be down for a certain while. So we use what we call the resource block to prevent this kind of accident. It might be an accident because you might just be learning. So we want to prevent accidental deletion or modification of resources. So you can actually use a resource log to prevent this. So you can use the log on any of this scope. You can use it to on the subscription. If you lock the subscription, that means resources within that particular subscription will not be deleted accidentally or even modified. Even if you are the one that deployed that resource, even if you have got the highest permission within the environment, you will not be able to modify it, except if you remove the lock or you edit the lock or you disable the lock. Or you want to put the lock on a resource group. When you put it on a resource group, it cascades down to all the resources within the resource group, and or on an individual resource. You say, oh, this particular resource, I do not want anyone to modify it, and you lock it up. So there are two types of resource lock that we have. We have the delete and the read only. So when you delete, that means you will not be able to delete. Yes, you can update. Yes, you can read that particular resource, but you will not be able to delete. You can modify it. But when you do the read only, you cannot delete, you cannot update, you can only read. So most times people just use the read only because it's safer. You still want to prevent people from modifying, but if it's just maybe a dev resource or something, you might not want to use it on there. But it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So you can actually use this resource log to prevent accidental or modification or deletion. We're gonna walk through that also. All right. So let's move on. We just talked about the Azure policies, and we're going to be setting up lots of things. However, we need like a dashboard that where we can get recommendation of what we can do. There are public IP addresses on some of our virtual machines. Maybe those machines have been deployed before we even enabled our policy. We want to see. So we need like a dashboard that actually build everything, that we can actually see like an all-in-one dashboard, and that's what the trust service trust portal gives you. So you can see the compliance manager, you can see your resources, you can get recommendation, you can see the security, what is actually missing, what you need to do, and within your environment. So the trust service trust portal gives you this. Same thing goes with the Azure Purview. And what these does is it doesn't give you insights based on data within your Azure environment only. It even brings data from a different cloud, your on-premises. It just gives you this single view for all your data, in one particular place for all your compliance, data governance risks and the like. Someone sign in from a location you do not like, or a location that has been banned, you want to get all those information. So the purview doesn't just give you the data based on the data within your Azure environment. Even if you have an AWS environment, you have like a Google environment, or even if you have your data on your own premises, it gets all those information to you in just one particular single, or let's say, unified view. You can see all those data, and you can see everything. Is you just managing your governance in just one place. So the Azure Purview or the Microsoft Purview gives this liberty. Now let's move ahead to management and deployment tools. Like I said, we're going to go a little bit faster compared to what we used to do. Now, management and deployment tools. I'm not going to really. Yeah, Sam, please.
All right, thanks. I just want to ask a question. So the purview gives for on-premise and the ones in the cloud, but for the service trust, that gives just an overview of what happened within just the cloud, right?
Your purview is more related to your data, within your environment. You understand?
Okay.
Your data, as against your
Yeah.
purview. Sorry, your purview gives you like a data. But your service trust gives you um, it brings it brings together everything related to security, compliance, and the like.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think that explains what I wanted
Okay,
to
so
clarify.
okay, so let me put it this way. I would say your service trust, provides you with information about, practices for customers to be able to manage their data. you know that's what
Okay.
your service trust portal gives you. When it comes to the security, they give you recommendation, compliance recommendation, and like, as against your purview, which helps you to manage your data, security, compliance, just in one place. It does extend. It's more related, but for purview, it gives you that liberty to bring in data from multi-cloud environment, from other environment also, and also your own premises.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, so you would say, oh, service trust, it's more related to the Azure cloud, but the Azure purview gives, it gives you that liberty to bring in data or security compliance recommendation from for any environment, regardless of if it's actual Azure environment, or if it's even on premises, if it's AWS, Google, Oracle, Google, and the likes. Okay, so we talked about
All right.
management
Thank you for that.
yeah, no problem. Management and deployment groups, and deployment tools. Now, we've a minute. Give me a minute, please. Okay, so um, so sorry, I put the place at okay. So management and deployment tools. Yeah, we are going to be talking about what are some of the tools that you can actually use, to manage resources deployment within the Azure environment. Now, I believe I showed you this one, and that's going to be the number one lab we are going to be talking about on that particular day, on like next week when the time comes. Now we are going to be looking at what are some of the tools you can actually use to interact within with the Azure environment. Now, the Azure portal is your go-to if you want to leverage on the GUI. But what if you do not want to do this using the GUI, the graphics interface? What are some of the tools you can also leverage on? So we are going to be talking about different tools. PowerShell is something very common to everyone that uses Windows. Bash is a common one for everyone that uses maybe Linux. Or, you want to leverage on, the scripting languages within the Azure environment. You might still want to use this Bash and PowerShell, but you can use what we call the cloud shell. For the cloud shell, it's actually in the cloud, so you can still leverage on it. Now, aside all these scripting languages that we've talked about, what are some of the other tools? I'm so sure you guys will have heard about infrastructure as a code tool for some of the people that are so inquisitive. We'll talk about Terraform, yeah, Ansible. We talk about ARM templates, cloud formation. All those tools. We can also use those tools to interact. The major thing is for us to be able to manage our resources deployment. Within the Azure environment. So, so let's start talking about them. You can see a lot of them, loads of them. So I'm just quickly going to talk about those guys here. Then when we move into, when I start sliding to or going to the slides, we won't really have, much to talk about, at least, just to go at a pace. Now the Azure portal, you guys know the Azure portal. I'm just going to open the Azure portal. For you to be able to access the Azure portal, all you need to do is just to go into your web browser. Azure Portal has got uh, an application on Google Play and App Store also. So if you want to go check it out, yeah, but you won't really be able to manage so much. But if you want to access the Azure Portal, all you need to do is just to go to portal.azure.com. and it takes you directly to the Azure portal. Like I said, when you leverage on the so if you do not have an Azure environment now, which is fine, you can we are going to be using, we're going to be assessing these next week. So I'm going to show you what are some of the different ways you can actually access or create your own Azure portal for you people that have not created any Azure environment. So we are going to be creating everything, next week, so you guys can be prepared. Now I'm just trying to sign in. Why? So Microsoft has made it so compulsory now. For you to be able to Azure access the Azure environment now, you need MFA, you need multi-factor authentication. Before now, we used to access without multi-factor authentication, but now it's so compulsory now we have to. So this is my Azure environment, where I do my own practicing. I've got two, three subscriptions in there. I've got so many resources. If there is a need for me to invite some of you guys, let's say you don't have access to the Azure portal, and you want to do some stuff, I can also give you access, by inviting you to this, and just for you to, do your practice, and after you're done, you deallocate those resources. So don't tell me, oh, I don't have access. I can always invite you, so if need be. So this is like my Azure environment, and this is how it looks like. All these resources, when you access for the first time, you are not going to see this, because these are recent resources. You can see how this looks like. So when you click on this icon, it gives you favorite resources that you want to deploy. But if you want to have all those resources, either you search for those resources here, or you even go to the Azure all services. From here, you can see all services Microsoft is actually offering within the Azure environment. So it's a very good way to deploy. It's a very good way. You can see categories based on whatever resource you want to leverage on. If it's DevOps, if it's container, compute, identity, when you talk about security and the like, whatever you want to deploy, you can see it here. Aside the portal, you can also leverage on the Cloud Shell. I just talked about the fact that if you are so conversant with using scripting to deploy your resources or manage your resource, and you do not want to do this from your local machine, you do not want to do this from your local Windows machine or your Windows bash machine, you can actually leverage on the Cloud Shell. All you need to do is just to click on this icon here, and what's going to happen is going to provision your shell environment for you. So you can leverage on, you can see immediately I click on this starts connecting. But one thing is, you cannot do this if you do not have let a subscription, because this needs a storage account to be able to be enabled. Just give me a minute, something happened. Okay. Okay. Please confirm you can still hear me. I'm so sure for now. It might not really be. Okay. So I'm just going to move this back to. Okay. So that's that about the Clash Shell. So you can see how the Clash Shell works. So I can even toggle this from Bash, to PowerShell. I can switch to PowerShell from Bash if I want to run the Bash. And if you want to leverage on the PowerShell on your Windows environment, if you want to leverage on the Bash on your Mac, Linux environment, you can still do that. Azure that actually gives you that liberty. All you need to do is just to connect that particular account. Let's say for PowerShell now I want to connect, we use the connect AZ account. You do not need to come anything. You would see how easy it is to interact with this particular environment. Let's say I want to connect, so I do not need to come anything. You can see if I go in here, all those scripts are actually available online, so you do not need to come anything. All I need to do know is, what do I want to achieve, what do I want to do. So I want to connect this particular Azure environment, and I want to use this, maybe a particular subscription, I want to connect to a particular tenant, and the likes. All I need to do is just to go in there and copy, the script. You can even see examples based on what you want to do. There are different examples based on what you want to do. If you want to connect using, for now, let's pretend as if we do not see this. But if you want to connect, this is what we need to do, and you can see the other scripts that we can actually use also, depending on what you're actually doing on the Azure environment. So you do not need to come anything. All you need is just a URL to this particular script documentation, and you're good. So when it is not as if we also just embed anything. We only make use of script commands that has actually been be added to that particular module. Aside that, we talked about the CLI, we talked about the PowerShell, which is fine. Now, there's something we call the Azure Arc. The Azure Arc, what it does is it gives you that liberty, it gives you that access to be able to extend your Azure environment to your on-premises. Now, we are not talking about VPN now. We are talking about, let's say, Microsoft is, let's say, Jam is hosting their workload, their web app, their website, or the way we understand it on the Azure environment. And because they know that at some point when they release the let's say when they release their results, there will be lots of traffic coming into that particular web application workload. What if we now scale out, but we do not want to scale out by creating a new machine within the Azure environment, because we are still going to pay for it. We have a server on our on-premises environment. Why not extend? Why not scale using that particular server? So we can actually use this Azure Arc to extend that capability. So it's just for you to extend your on-premises, your cloud environment to your on-premises environment. The next thing we are going to be talking about is the Azure Resource Manager, the Azure ARM template. Now I talked about the fact that we have what we call the infrastructure as a code tools, where we talk about, or where you might be hearing Terraform, and some other things. Azure actually has their own also, which we call the ARM template, and another one which we call the Bicep. The Bicep is just like the mini ARM template, is the newest one and the likes. Now on AWS, they leverage on cloud formations. There are other ones also, where we talk about the provisioning, the configuration tools, just like Chef, Ansible, lot of them, Pulumi and the likes. There are lots of them. But the good thing is, once you understand one, you can actually, use this knowledge, just like the Azure Arc, extend that knowledge to the other ones. So it's not for you to learn. All you need to learn is just the syntax. The Terraform syntax is different from the AMP syntax. But once you understand one, you can use that knowledge, to learn, or when you're learning the other ones. So, but we talked about the Azure portal is the GUI. Whatever you want to do, you go in there and just press, and you start deploying or managing those resources. When we started talking about the PowerShell CLI, the question will now be, what will be the connection? What will be the connection? Yes, we know you've said, we are going to run a command, and we run the connect AZ account command and it connects. But what's the connection? There should be like an interface, like an API that makes it possible. What makes it possible is the Azure Resource Manager, which is the ARM. So it's just like the connecting API between all the tools you want to use in managing those resources and your Azure environment. So let's start looking at it. So these are the tools you can see. I'm really not going to be explaining these. I'm just going to be scrolling through. You can see the Azure portal, a PowerShell, Cloud Shell, CLI command, whatever you want to do. The Azure Arc I just talked about. When you want to extend your resource, from the Azure environment to the on-premises. You can see this is your on-premise, and you want to extend, that particular resource, or you want to extend that particular workload from the Azure environment to the cloud, to the on-premises. And it's not just to on-premises. Now you can also extend. Let's say you have a virtual machine deployed within your AWS. Now you can actually use the Azure App to extend that capability to AWS. So very, very good. Um, the Azure Resource Manager, this is what I just talked about. This is just like an API, that connects, whatever tool you want to use in managing your resource with the Azure environment. So you can see it sits here, and these are the resources here. You can see from here. So yeah, if you're leveraging on the portal, the PowerShell, the CLI, whatever you're leveraging on, or some any other REST client, or any other thing you want to leverage on, any um tool you want to use in managing your resources. And when we talk about the management of the resources, we are talking about creating those resources, updating those resources, deleting those resources. Whenever I say, oh, management of resources, so these are, things we are going to be, looking at. Now everything still have to talk to the Azure Resource Manager. All those tools need to talk to the Azure Resource Manager, and the Azure Resource Manager will now be, the one to act on, those resources, depending on the action, you are doing. If it's the update action, the delete, the whatever you're doing. Now we talked about the infrastructure as a code, and what does this give you? Now I'm not going to dive into this, but I'm just going to tell you what this does. With when you go to the portal, you just keep deploying your resources the way you like. But what if there is a need for me to deploy a resource you've deployed before, and I want to have that same thing, that same deploy? We can argue that, oh, let's go and check the properties of those resources, but you might not be able to access all the properties of those resources. For you to have this consistency, in your deployment, or let me just put it this way: the infrastructure as a code, what it does is we want to treat those our infrastructure, those virtual machine. Now, we want to treat those storage accounts as a code. We want to have a code for them. We want to have a code that is used in managing them. So we can see those infrastructure and say, if I apply this particular code, it's going to create this, it's going to deploy this, and this is the particular infrastructure. Now, before we only deploy application using code, now we've started deploying infrastructures using code. Now, and that's why we take infrastructure as a code. So we want to have that consistency. One of the very good way to do this, or one of the very good, or one of the benefits, is to have that consistency. Another benefit is to be able to version that particular infrastructure. We want to be able to roll back to a previous version of that infrastructure. We want to have like a version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, the same way, we can roll back. Let's say you don't have money again, you can come from iPhone 16 back to 15. At least Apple is making use of infrastructure as a code. That's just a joke though. Okay, so it's just you treating your infrastructure, just like a code, and there are a lot of benefit. We just mentioned the consistency. We just mentioned the fact that you want to have a versioning. You want to be able to manage this based on standard, and the likes. The ARM template is Microsoft infrastructure as a code tool. The same way we have the bicep. We are going to be looking at the bicep. Like I said, not going to go into these, but what this does is you just having, that declarative syntax. And when we talk about the declarative syntax, now I want to deploy a virtual machine, and that virtual machine contains a lot of other resources for sure. I explained initially that when you're deploying a virtual machine, you are not just deploying the machine itself. There are lots of things that needs to come along with it. The virtual machine, the virtual network, the subnet, we are going to have like storage accounts attached to it. We are going to have like, yeah, like Azure Dix and the like. Lots of things are going to come, public IP address, and some other things depending on what we are actually deploying. You know, but we do not want to, if you are using these, or let's say you are doing, or you are running like a PowerShell, you need to first deploy, the resource group. Then after then you deploy, maybe the VNet, then, because if it goes in there and it doesn't say the VNet, it won't deploy. Then you need to deploy, you need to enable the subnet, you need to deploy, like the public IP address and the like. But if you are leveraging on an infrastructure as a code tool, which has declarative syntax, you don't want to care what's actually being deployed first. All you need to do is just to say, this is what I want to deploy. These are these are the different services you're going to be deploying. I don't care how you want to deploy it. Just go and deploy. So it's just going to deploy, based on steps. You do not need to say, this is what you need to deploy first, then after this one, then after this one. No, you don't need to tell, it's just going to deploy. Same thing goes with Terraform and the like. So it does have, so you can see repeatable resources. We know what we are going to expect. We know what we are going to get because, we've deployed something related before and we are treating this as a code. Now, what we are doing is let's update the code. Okay, we have, 4 Azure disks attached to this virtual machine before. Let's add additional one. So we know what we are going to get, when you're actually leveraging on this. So these are this is just, the way, or let's say this is one of the infrastructure as a code tool Microsoft has. Another one is the bicep. And you can see it looks like, what is this for some people? But if you're able to read through this now, you understand. Now, when you are deploying anything, I've talked about the fact that there are some things that are very important. You cannot deploy a storage account, you cannot deploy a virtual machine without deploying. You need to deploy your resource within a region for sure. A region is compulsory. Now, when we're deploying, let's say we want to deploy within the West Europe, it's compulsory. We say, oh, region, what location do we want to use? And this is what you can see here. It's just telling you what parameter, and the parameter is location. And that location, you know, is we are talking about the name now. So okay, we have some data types, string, character, boolean. When you talk about boolean, we're talking about true or false, 0 and 1. We talk about string is just combination of alphanumeric word or something. Or we are talking about integers. We are talking about 0 1 2 3. So those are just data type, for the name. So we are saying parameter. What parameter are we describing? The location. Now, what region? The region of the resource group. So that means we've created a resource group and we say the resource group is in West Europe. What I need this to do is just to take the resource group. I can decide not to say resource group dot location. I can decide to just put West Europe. But this is me just saying, whatever location my resource group is, please, I do not want to just worry myself about, having, and having to know what if I change that particular, or I deploy another resource group and, I'm copying the script, will I start changing it to East Europe or, East US, and the like. So just take the resource group location, and that's what this has done here. The same thing goes with this one. What parameter now? The parameter I want to deploy a storage account. You can all see that what we are trying to do is just a storage account based on the resource you are seeing here. So this parameter says it's just like an attribute, the name of the storage account, and this one also just don't worry about this. It's just some combination of technical jargons. Now, but this is where we need to worry about, which is what resource do you want to deploy. So you can see the keyword to say resource, and that's why it has got like a different color when it comes to the coding of that word. Now, the storage account is what we want to deploy. This is just like the resource, um let's say, like the resource attribute and like the version, of that resource that we want to deploy. So we have the Microsoft.storage slash storage account and the like. So you don't. So now, yeah, we have name of the storage account, location which we've actually mentioned here, the SKU, which is we talked about the tier the other time. Now, I'm so sure we've talked about the locally redundancy, LRS, GRX, and the like. And so, yeah, I'm saying, okay, what SKU do you want to describe? What tier do you want to, I just want, the LRS standard. I want GRS or something, it's just going to be locally redundancies and the like. Now, we talk about this kind of storage account. We have different type of storage account. I'm so sure we talked. Oh, okay. I think we only talk about the type where we talk about the blob, the table, the queue. Now we are going to be talking about the kind where we talk about the premium, storage account V2, the blob, and the likes. That will be in the 104. Like I said, everything we've done in this fundamental is still what we're going to be talking about when we get to 104. Now, it's talking about it. And the last one, we talk about the access tier, where we said auth, if you are accessing the data within that particular storage account frequently, you leverage on the auth. If it's something within 30 days, you leverage on the cool. You can leverage on the code if it's 90 days, the archive within 180 days. So you can see all these things are something you can actually read. It's just for you to be able to understand what is going on within your code you know now you can see now, even if you go in there and say, ChatGPT, can you generate a code to deploy a virtual machine? I'm so sure with the little I've said now, you'll be able to read some information within that particular code. So that is how you just continue learning, and very soon you understand even this code that it doesn't even it's not even different from you learning how to speak and write in English. So that's how it looks like. So, but we are not going to go deep into it. The last um module, or the last learning path within this particular Azure admin is the monitoring tool. Now, here we are going to be talking about, I just talked about the activity logs of on resources the other time, the audit logs. Now let's really go into, what are some of the monitoring tools that we have here. Now, we are going to talk about the Azure Advisor. From the name, you guys should understand what this guy does. It's just advice. Now, it's not advising you based on just costing. It's not the cost management that just advise you based on costing. This guy is going to advise you on costing, security remediation. It's going to advise you on everything within the Azure environment. What are some of the things you need to do? Now, the service health. Sometimes we say the Azure portal is down. Sometimes we say our Azure resources are down. Where are you going to be checking this? If it's really related to your region, or is related to, maybe is worldwide or something, or a particular type of resource, you want to see. And the last one will be the Azure Monitor. For every resource that we deploy within our environment, we need to be able to monitor those resources. A virtual machine deployment is a typical example. We've deployed a virtual machine now, but we want to make sure that when that virtual machine CPU usage hits 75%, we want to see. We can go in there and see those results and see that particular CPU usage and say, oh, this is what's going on. Because when you deploy anything, you need to be able to monitor. And someone asked me about SRE, what they do. This is one of the things they do. They leverage on some of this on this particular tool, but there are a lot of them. Now you can see, oh, log analytics. I talked about the fact that, let's say you have your audit log, your sign-in logs that only stays within your tenant for 7 days, 14 days, depending on the type of license you've got. What if you want to still have those logs within your environment after that time? You can actually leverage on, log analytic workspace just for you to be able to store in those logs, and when there is a need for you to bring out those logs and, and work on them, you can actually, use that. We have the Azure Monitor Alert. I just talked about the CPU usage of a virtual machine. Do I need to always go in there to check that usage and say, oh, it's 75%? It's going to be, maybe when I check back in the next 10 minutes, it's going to be 80%. Why not create an alert that, you can get that particular notification that, okay, this is 75%. Is there a need for you to act? Do you have something automated within your environment, or is it something manual, and you've deployed an application also, you want to check what is going on within the application, you can use what we call the application insight. It is not just the workload we are monitoring now. We want to monitor what's going on within the application also. So you can, but all these are still, the application inside the Azure Monitor, all these still works with the monitor alert works with the Azure Monitor. So let's just quickly see what this does. I talked about the Azure Advisor. It gives you recommendation. The recommendation is not just limited to costing. It's not limited to security. Like I've said, you want to see, reliability, the performance of that resource. That resource is not performing well. You've deployed a 1 GB and it's almost nearing the 1 GB. It gives you that recommendation if you want to do this. If you want to, upgrade to premium, if you want to downgrade to standard, it gives you all those things, that recommendation based on best practices within the Azure environment, just to optimize your deployment. Now, the service health, like I said, you know, it's actually a collection of services, not just one. And I'm going to explain what this does. Like I said the other time, is it a global status you're looking for? Is your resource, when your resource go down, is it something global? Is it just related to a particular service itself you are actually leveraging on? Or is it related to, a particular resource you deployed? So we have the Azure Service Out, but we've got like collection of services within there. We have the Azure status where you can go in and type in status.azure.com. When you go in there, let's see if I type in status.azure.com. So it takes you to the Azure portal, Azure status dashboard, and here what you can do is, you can go in there and check the services running on Azure. You can check your region, what's going on. It's any of those region down, any resource you are leveraging on. Okay, we are leveraging in on, Azure function. Is it down in UK West? Is it down in Switzerland West? You can see when there is a change on this particular thing. Now you can see all Azure services in all those regions are fine. Everything is fine. If there is anything, any issue, you'll be able to check that. You'll be able to see, and what gives you that particular leverage. What you have a dashboard, which is the Azure status. You can actually leverage on that. Now we have the service health, which is where you can actually see those particular service and the region you're using. You can see that within your environment. We're going to be looking at that as part of our labs also. Then the last one will be the resource health. This is tailored to a particular resource. Is that virtual machine down? Is it your virtual machine? Is there an issue on there? So it's related to individual cloud service, or cloud resource, not something general to all. It might be your own Azure firewalls that just went down, so you want to check why it goes down. So you can check the resource health to see why it's down. So you will see most of the time they are always within, those resource tags or resource menu. So you can see, what's going on. The last one we're going to talk about is the Azure Monitor. Like I said, the Azure Monitor, this is just like a tool that gives you an insight of what's going on within your environment. So what it does is it collects what we call, telemetry, or let's say metrics, logs, and it scrapes those logs, it scrapes those metrics, and give you information based on that. And this is not just related to your cloud environment. It also does the same for workload on your on-premises environment. So there are different ones you can leverage on, application insight if this is related to the application. We have what we call the log analytics also. You want to be able to go in there, check the logs, and analyze the log. Smart alert. Okay, just an example I just gave you the other time. a virtual machine nearing storage usage of 95%, CPU usage of 95%. You know, when it hits 100, there will be decrease in performance of that particular virtual machine. So you want to set an alert, which we call the smart detection, and say, oh, before an issue comes up, please alert me. You know, that's what we call the smart detection. So you want to check that. Automation settings, actions. Now, a CPU usage of 75% has been checked, and we've got a notification saying, oh, this particular virtual machine CPU usage has, it's now up to 75%. Then what will happen? What if I'm sleeping? There is nothing, and I did not. Let's say my phone is on silent. That means if I do not wake up to check what's going on my phone, there will be a problem. So we can actually create what we call, or configure what we call, or enable the automation action. Is it do we want to scale? Let's say you are leveraging on VMSS now. Do you want to add additional virtual machine, to cater for that incoming request? So you can actually do that. Let's say, oh, okay, when it gets to 75% and that CPU usage stays there for 10 minutes, please create additional virtual machine to cater for the incoming action or incoming request. So you can actually leverage on that. And the last one, you can actually have like a customized dashboard. Whatever you want to see, it is not compulsory to see what your neighbor is saying. You can create your own dashboard that suits your own taste, whatever you want to be seeing in there. So you can actually do that within the Azure customers. um and that brings us to the end of the theoretical part of the AZ 900. Now, like I said, from next week, it's going to be a little bit different, since we are going to be focusing on the labs, even for the other ones. Though, for the other ones also, I will try what I'm going to do. I'm not going to use the official PowerPoint slide so that we don't take all the time. What I'm going to do is, I can come up with one or two slides, that can actually help us while we are actually transitioning, but it's not going to be this one because the main focus is going to be the lab. I want you guys to be able to go through the labs also with me. So well, within the labs, I'm so sure we've got so many words, keywords and the like that are going to come up. Even when they don't come up, when we look at the labs, I will use that lab, to explain what we need to explain or what we need to know, before we go ahead to talk about, the lab itself. So that's what we're going to be doing. So from next week, we are going to be so focused on labs. When we get to security and Azure DevOps, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the portal itself instead of using the PowerPoint slide. I'm going to go into the portal, explain what you need to know, then we just from there, then we go back to the labs, perform the labs, and we are good. So that would be the pattern for the other classes. Why I had to go through the is because this is the fundamental. I just needed you guys to understand some of those terms for people just coming into the cloud, from people just coming into tech, so that from here, at least for you guys that have understood a little of those terms now, you can actually relate when I'm talking about, oh, traffic, incoming traffic, incoming requests, workload and the likes. So most times I will not just be mentioning, oh, server. Even if I say compute, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm talking about the virtual machine and the likes. um this brings us to the end of this particular class. Any question from anyone before we call it a day? Demola, I can tell you, if you want to add anything, maybe ways to help them or something, anything you want to add, you can just unmute and talk. So yeah, that depends.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, nothing much, not really. So just like heads up. So if you can, get yourself ready before we go, deep into the practical aspect of the training, just like Baba Femi said earlier. So you can, watch YouTube videos, LinkedIn videos, some relative free videos online that, that would prepare you ahead. So it would be bad to come in, or to come in on that day, or probably on the start of the practical, and then you look lost. You understand? So I always like when students prepare ahead, so that when you come to class, it doesn't look like magic. You understand? So there are videos available on Baba Femi's channel that you can take your time. Even if I know everyone is busy, with daily things, probably personal life and other, but if you can dedicate 1 or 2 hours daily to just glance through, probably at your free time, or when you're about to go to bed, or probably very early in the morning, is always helpful. And then before you know it, you'll be, you know, comfortable, with, everything that, that you'll be hearing on that day. And then it will give you like a head ahead of, a whole lot of people.
Yes.
It has worked for me. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, thanks, Demola. Sam was asking a question if these are some of the videos we are referring to. Yes. So if you go in, I've got the Azure Fundamental, which is a 900, and this is what we just finished now. Here you can see all the classes. This is from the last class. So if you want to go to the classes, class one, class two, class three, but on here also, what I've done is I've done like a summary class for them. And after the summary class, we did each of those labs. So you can see the lab one, lab two, lab three, lab four, lab five, lab six, lab seven, and lab eight, which is what we're going to be looking at. I have a different playlist also just for the labs, which is these one, Azure Fundamental Labs, just the labs only, if you want to go to the labs only. But if you want to go to the classes are there. One reason why I will not point you back to these particular live classes that we've doing is the fact that I've seen that majority of the ones that we've recorded, I've got no audio, so it's been a pain, But if you want to still go to the classes, you can see the classes are here. The Azure Fundamental is 900. I've got the classes for the Azure Administrator, but like I said, I will not be going to the same way I gone through these classes because, you know, if we had to do that, 3 months we are still here. But I'm just going to be making sure the most crucial ones are what we're going to be discussing. Now, yeah, if you want to go through those classes, fine. Like I said, I will still talk about this thing, but I'm just going to go directly to the portal and show you. And while showing you, I start talking about them, which is better. But if you want to go through those classes, they are here. And I think I tried to do the labs for the 104 also. I was being lazy and I did only two. But I can assure you I will complete everything and to upload. I have some of those labs, completed. But one very big thing about making videos, making videos is just like you having a second job. Talking for hours is not the problem. The number of hours that you've used in making those videos is the number of, time you're going to go back to edit those videos. You never know. There might be a lot of bloopers and likes. And you just don't want to leave it there. So you take your time to start editing. It's just going to take away all the time. So I've got so many videos I've recorded and I've not been able to even edit them. I will try as much maybe for our classes, before we get to the administrator, to add, to some of those labs, then upload the security ones, the DevOps one. But I've got some DevOps one here, but this is not your business now, so don't go near the DevOps. Let's start from the fundamental, then we go to the administrator, the security, and we get to DevOps. Then from there we'll start talking about the AI and cybersecurity. Yep. Any other question before we call it today? Demola, thank you for that. Just a very good advice from Demola. You just want to be prepared ahead. All right. So if there are no questions, no other contributions, we'll just call it a day. Bye, everyone.